Hello YouTube, my name is Ben and this is a game between Garry Kasparov and Viswanathan Anand in 1995, the PCA World Championship. Garry Kasparov playing white pieces and Viswanathan Anand plays the black pieces. So Kasparov starts out with e4, the king pawn opening. Anand replies with e5, the open game. Kasparov continues with development knight to f3. Anand replies knight to f6 development. And here Garry Kasparov plays bishop to b5. This is a Spanish game. Anand plays a6, putting a question to the bishop. In many different variations of the Ruy Lopez, there's different options. You can take the knight here on c6. You can retreat to a4, keeping the pressure on the knight and this pawn, or something like c4. The most popular option and the move that's played in the game is bishop back to a4. Anand continues with his development, knight to f6, and Garry Kasparov castles here. This pawn is hanging right now, but it can be recaptured back soon enough. So Anand captures the pawn, and Garry Kasparov plays d4. You would think, okay, Garry Kasparov is giving up another pawn, but this pawn can real easily be recaptured, and Anand doesn't recapture or capture this pawn because it's giving up the center, and black really likes to have keep a presence in the center. So Anand here plays b5, kicking the knight away, so it can no longer keep the pressure on this knight and this pawn, so this pawn later can advance. The bishop gets kicked back to b3. Anand now plays d5, having two pawns in the center and challenging the center, as he has pretty decent pieces in the center, and white's really not that developed except for being castled. So right now the position is very equal, and this is along the book lines. Garry Kasparov continues with pawn takes on e5. Anand develops his bishop to e6, and Garry Kasparov plays knight to d2, connecting the knight and also attacking this knight. This knight have a really nice central outpost right here. So Garry Kasparov really wants to put some pressure on that knight and get it kicked away. Now the knight retreats to c5, and Garry Kasparov plays c3. c3 is here to prepare for the d4 advance here. And right now, Garry Kasparov Anand plays d4, challenging this pawn. Right now, this is book line and sort of where the end of the book line ends. So Garry Kasparov plays knight to g5. Or you say, like, why did Garry Kasparov plays knight to g5? It's hanging this knight here. Well, actually, he can get back this material easily. Let's see what happens if queen takes the knight, which wasn't played in the game, but it's actually recommended and it's a book line. So if queen takes knight, then the queen, the white queen, can go to f3, attacking the black knight. It's going to fort the king and the rook. The bishop goes back to defend the knight, but then this really weak f7 square is being attacked, and so white would take that pawn. The king has to go up, and now Kasparov can play knight to e4, forking the queen and the knight, but there's a double attack on the queen, so the queen has to move, and the queen have to go to f5, giving up the queen in a queen exchange. If the black queen here takes on e5, then the black just basically loses his queen, because now bishop to g5 check, and the king has nowhere to go, and the only move to do is to give up the black queen. And you know, black didn't really get compensation for a queen. He got 2 minor pieces for a queen, which isn't really good enough. And we have this devastating diagonal, or devastating file open up to the king, and the white pieces are very well coordinated, and the black pieces are not coordinated enough to provide sufficient defense. So queen takes on e5 is a mistake. And so the queen has to give itself up for a queen trade. And the following series is some moves played by Fritz, and it just shows you how the position is gonna end up with pretty much even material. And this is a very, very even game, and it's well within book lines. But instead, in the game, the queen did not capture the knight on g5. Instead, what happened was Anand plays pawn takes on c3. What this does is it sort of really puts some pressure on the cramped queen side. I think Anand was better to take the knight here and go for an exchange and go to the endgame. But Anand instead takes this pawn here. Yes, it's doing a lot of damage to the queen side, but the king's on the king side. And Anand's king isn't even castled, and there's going to be some attack on the king side from Kasparov. And this is going to ultimately lead to the demise of Anand, because the queen side just gets torn up by Anand. But Kasparov just say like, okay, I got my pieces there, I can just move them all to the king side, attack your king. And so the play continues with knight takes bishop on e6. Pawn recaptures because the knight's attacking the queen. He doesn't want to move this knight to recapture because he wants to be aggressive with it on the queen side. And so Garry Kasparov recaptures the pawn. Anand plays queen to d3, sort of bringing his queen to the action, giving out a lot of rays of attack from the queen. You know, it can attack a lot of stuff from here. Garry Kasparov brings his bishop to c2, attacking the queen. The queen takes the pawn, attacking the rook. And now Garry Kasparov plays knight to b3, offering a knight exchange. This knight right now doesn't really have any good squares to go. It can't go here. Well, that's away from the action right now, and it can go here or not really. I mean, it can go here, but instead it chose to put his knight on b3. And now we have a knight exchange. We have the bishop take. Now the bishop is on a very, very nice diagonal here, hitting this weak pawn on e6. Here Anand plays knight to d4, and now we're sort of getting into a little tactical variation. Instead of just simply where previously it's just an attack on the queen side, now we get into a little bit of tactics. So first thing I saw when I saw this, I say, why doesn't queen just take rook? Well, if queen takes rook immediately, well, it's going to be bad news for black, because the queen can come to h5, giving check. If pawn blocks, then the queen can come back, hitting the knight. If the knight moves, yeah, the queen's going to get the rook, and you know, black lost a rook and a pawn, and now, or black gained, white lost a rook and a pawn, and now white's going to recover that rook. If something like, say, if king comes to defend, well, that's going to be very bad news. The white rook can just come over. The black knight has to block, and still the rook's going to be lost. So right now, this knight can't really be defended. Say if the rook moves, well, still going to be check, and it's going to be really bad for black because we have these moves with the bishop that can easily close in the position. Say if the king goes to the dark square, well, there's a lot of tactics here. He's just going to lose the queen through a discover attack to the queen. So if this variation does occur, if he does take the rook first, if Anand, instead of playing this move, knight to d4, preventing this attack on the rook. I mean, Anand's still gonna lose a rook, but if we just have something here, these are variations discovered by Fritz. We sort of have a pretty nice, decent game. We have 3 pawns here with 1 pawn and 2 bishops. Anand has a slightly disadvantaged position, but he can definitely organize his defense well enough to achieve a draw at least. But instead we see knight to d4. And now Kasparov just unleashes an attack on the king side with queen to g4, followed up with bishop to h6. But first, Anand plays queen takes a1. Here, Kasparov plays bishop takes pawn on e6. Anand plays rook to d8. Another choice was here to capture, but then Kasparov would just recapture with check, so that was no good. Kasparov plays bishop to bishop to h6. Let's see what happens if instead of rook to d8, what was played was bishop to f8, or bishop to c5 from f8. Well, then there will be then the white can just check the black king on d7. The king has to move. The pawn would advance, and the king would go in the corner. This is definitely advantageous for black, but this was a move recommended by Fritz. So instead we have a move defending the knight for this file. I say it's not really that helpful. Kasparov plays bishop to h6. Now if pawn takes, well, it's going to be game over. If pawn takes on h6, Kasparov checks with the queen on h5. King has to move up. There's no other squares for it to go. Checkmate. So I can't do that. Instead, what Anand played was queen to c3. And now Kasparov plays bishop takes on g7, queen to d3, allowing the queen to get back into defense of the game. Maybe something like this. Well, actually, let's look at what happens after bishop takes rook here. If the knight goes to e2, the king would have to move back. The knight goes to c3, discover attack on the rook. The rook moves. The queen goes to e2. If the rook takes, well, it's going to be checkmate. So the rook can't move. It's basically offering a queen exchange to alleviate some pressure on the white king. It's a strong kingside attack. Best move here is just g3, giving an escape square for the king. The pawn pushes to c5. This is played by Fritz. King goes to g2, and only now does black force the queen trade. Here black takes a pawn. Bishop check. King moves out the way. Rook to a1, attacking the knight. And now bishop to e7, discover attack on the bishop, so the bishop has to move. Now, what would happen if instead, knight back, bishop to f6, attacking the rook. Rook moves over. King check. King moves over. Pawn pushes. Knight to c6. Rook to d1 check. King to b6, move out the way. And rook takes h7. Well, this is not very good because white's going to have 3 pawns here and 1 pawn versus 3 pawns on the queen side. Material is, well, black is down 1 pawn, but white has the bishop pair, so white's definitely going to win in this variation. Instead, we have in the real game, we have just queen to g6, offering a queen trade this way instead of having the knight goes to e2, queen trade on this side. So black is now defending, trying to defend, getting some exchange off because 2 bishop and a queen on attacking your king in the center is very devastating. So now Kasparov plays bishop to f6. What a great move! It's attacking the king. There's just look at the control here. It has this diagonal, has this diagonal. Once the queen gets into the action and the rook, it's basically over for black. Black is stuck in the middle. The pawns aren't really contributing to the king's defense, while the white king is safe behind his row of pawns. So the Anand plays bishop to e7, offering a bishop exchange. Kasparov accepts that. First, Anand takes on g4, queen exchange. Kasparov plays bishop takes queen on g4, recapturing. Anand plays king takes f7, e7, capturing the dark square bishop. And now the rook swings over to c7, attacking the pawn. Pawn pushes. It's being protected by the knight. And right now, as you can see, it's rook versus knight, rook knight versus rook bishop. But right now, white definitely has an advantage. It has a pass pawn in the center. And soon you'll see Kasparov is going to just connect these 4 pawns together and overwhelm black. So these are the following series of moves in the endgame. As you can see, right now it's just some maneuvering. Anand's really trying to advance his pawns, but Kasparov really just stops that. I mean, Anand can't really make any progress, really. The king is centralized on the 3rd rank, while Anand's king is not as centralized, is on the 7th rank. And pawn pushes here because these 2 things are being forked, the pawn and the knight. So if the pawn pushes, it defends both. And now, just in a couple moves, Anand will resign. The king moves up to e4, attacking the rook. Rook has to go back. This pawn now is unprotected, so Kasparov can take the pawn. And now it's 3 versus 5, and it's over for Anand. Anand moves his knight back for discover attack on the bishop, but also at the same time attack the rook. Well, the rook just swings over, looking for a rook trade. Of course, Anand doesn't want a rook trade. And so Kasparov pushes upon attacking the knight. There's an in-between move of a check, but Kasparov just gets out of the way. and this pawn's being defended by the bishop. There's nothing really Anand can do. He moves the knight. Kasparov continues to push his pawn. If this pawn pushes, you know, he can capture, 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 and then he can always bring his rook back, stop this pawn, and then have 4 pawn versus 1 pawn. You know, it's a win for Kasparov. And after these 2 moves, Anand resigns. Thank you, and this is a game analysis by Chess Insights. Bye.